Kira Troilo, hi.
Hi, Jennifer Apple.
We got the full name. I'm
Yes.
trying to think the last time somebody did that to me. It hasn't been recent if that's the case. So your home space seems so vibrant. We love all the colors.
Thank
Um,
you.
I'm so excited that you're in this space. For anybody who does not know you, who are you today?
Good question. Yes, my home space is vibrant. I have the yellow chair to just remind me,
I know. I
it's
love it.
sunny for my life. Um, Today, ooh, I'm gonna answer that more in the today season of my life,
Yeah.
because I have been a lot of things. I've been an actor, I've been a choreographer, I've been a director, I've been a manager of an online company. But today, I'm very proudly choosing to be an EDI consultant. I keep calling myself an accidental entrepreneur, and a very proud mom and wife. And
The
yeah,
most adorable
that's
kid like
oh,
ever.
thank you.
Like truly the most adorable kid.
I mean, I'm biased, yes.
Yeah.
I
But
will say,
also, considering I'm biased too, working now with your husband, your family is kinda like the perfect little family from the outside. I imagine things aren't always the same from the
oh,
inside, but it's, like, actually unfair.
yeah, oh god. Yeah, nothing nothing is perfect on the inside, but I am very
Yeah.
lucky. I'm very blessed. Yes, have a wonderful husband who's also an actor, so he gets it all. And yeah, my son is Levi. He's 5.5. And I say frequently, I know we'll get into what I do, but he
Yeah.
is the best teacher,
Mm.
in, grace and patience and kindness and all of that. So, yes, I'm very, very lucky.
For anybody who doesn't know what an EDI consultant is, what is it at face value?
Yes. So, an EDI consultant, EDI stands for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I am an EDI consultant specifically for theater and the arts. So I look at the systems there that are, enormously different from corporate settings.
Mhm.
I also use the acronym EDI very intentionally. I know this work is probably more commonly at this point called DEI,
Mhm.
um, but that is changing across the industry, I think, and with good reason.
Yeah.
I wrote a whole article about this, but very intentionally, I like E first, um, because when we look at DEI work, I think most people think, oh, it's diversity work. And
Mhm.
that's true. I think, more specifically, people think it's racial diversity work.
Right.
Again, true, but not all of it. Um, with an equity first model, it's really about making systems that support and value the diversity in the room, in
Mhm.
any specific room or the room at large in theater. What I've come up with is equity first, considers the diversity in the room, and that equals inclusion when we can
Yeah.
create systems that work for everybody.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you refer to it as EDI and not DEI,
Yeah.
in that the first time I encountered this work as like a way to actually forge change and use certain processes was actually with EDI. I was introduced to it as EDI and I kept
Yes.
saying that, and then I would meet people who would say DEI, and we had to kind of be like, "Wait, we're saying the same thing, we think." And then I have started saying DEI because it seemed to be more of the vernacular that's used just semantically, but it was actually my first intro into it, and that was when I was in grad school in San Francisco. So I wonder if I don't know if it's like an East Coast, West Coast variation, but once I came back to New York, that was a very specific shift that I remember having to do, like with the verbiage. Um, and
Wow.
yeah, and I hear that totally as like the framework that the equity part, the beautiful meme of like the boy on the two little boys and the
The
boxes and how
boxes I
they
use, I show it
yeah,
every first day.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a Googleable image, friends. If you just literally search EDI and like boy in box, it will pop up immediately. And yeah, you have two kids who are of different heights, and instead of giving them the same exact box, you give them boxes that are different sizes so that they can be at the same level of height. And that is ultimately, I think, like a very watered down version of like equity.
Yeah,
But yeah, to start with that, then you have a way that we can finally all communicate because we're all at the same playing field, or
exactly.
trying to be at least.
Exactly, and that's what I say. There's also, if you're Googling while you're at it, there's another, version of that image that has the boy in the wheelchair as the first one.
Mhm.
So, like, that boy in the
Yeah,
wheelchair can't even stand on the first box.
yeah,
So, it's a starting point for how we can look
yeah,
at the work of equity. But what I say to people, because people, have a lot of, preconceived notions about equity and equality and all of it, what I say is that equity just acknowledges that we all have a different starting line.
right.
And as, theaters, as arts organizations, when we're looking to be equitable, we want to give people the tools that they need for the opportunity to succeed at the same level. So we
Yeah,
can't guarantee that people succeed at the same level, but we want to give them the tools to be able to access that same,
yeah,
level of, support and success.
yeah.
So that's kind of where I start every room I go in.
I love that. How did you decide, or what made you decide to make this pivot? How did you come to this work?
It's a wild tale that really is, lifelong,
Yeah.
I this is, a 45-minute podcast, so I'm going to simplify.
We could have a little longer, you
I
know.
mean, I talk, yeah, if you know me, I talk forever about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just briefly going back, I think, I have been, uh, I think my life has been preparing me to kind of figure this out.
Mm,
And I will talk about the figuring it out, but, I'm a Black biracial woman. I, have a Black dad. I have a white mom who passed away when I was young.
I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm writing a book about it. So more to
Oh,
come.
yeah.
Um, but yes, and then, my amazing, best friend, stepmom came into my life when I was young, and she's Black. So I always say, I'm a Black biracial woman who was raised in a Black household in a white hometown,
Mm,
Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Shout out. That's where I actually met my husband, Jared. So we're both from Shrewsbury. But I basically grew up in the in between. I grew up kind of navigating spaces, not feeling like I really fully belonged anywhere.
yeah.
Um, and, I did that my whole childhood. I did that going into college. I did it as I, entered the acting world. I started, my, career kind of in theater in Boston, about 15 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and, interestingly, when I was in school, I kind of played, I was in the hot box in Guys and Dolls. I was, Lucy and Jekyll and Hyde. I
Mhm.
didn't play any race specific roles really when I was a kid. But when I got to Boston, all I did was play the Black roles. Um,
Mhm.
and really, it was interesting to all of a sudden be seen as a member of the Black community and then have all these expectations on me of what that meant.
Mhm.
And my voice is, I belt, I can do soprano, but like I don't have that stereotypical Black voice. So I was
Mm,
continually, in my journey as an actor, kind of navigating like who I am and what roles I'm getting called in for and why. So then we get to 2020, and that, means something, I think, for everyone, what that time meant for people. For me, I had a 2-year-old at home. We know we were stuck here with no theater. And I just had a chance to really stop and reassess and like reevaluate what I
mhm.
was doing and why. And that led to me starting a blog, called biracialmom.com, if you want to check it out. But I started just writing about my experiences being like a biracial performer and what did it mean, for me to be in West Side Story and I'm not, Latina, like what did it mean to
Mhm.
be in The Color Purple and I was the lightest skinned one there.
Mhm.
Um, and along with writing the blog, I was angry like everyone else watching the news and, just feeling like I was screaming into a void on social media
Yeah.
and not knowing what I could do. Um, and then I had this conversation with my husband, Jared, who is white and Jewish. And he, in a moment of, what was kind of heated and me just saying how frustrated I was, and didn't know what I could do. And Jared really he wants to credit himself with the foundation, which he cannot take. But
Good.
but he did ask me the question which started this company, which was, "What do you want us to do?" And I think by us, he meant, people who are not Black. Um,
Mhm.
because people were angry, rightfully so, and I was angry. But that was the question that really stuck with me, is like, what do you want us to do? Um,
Mhm.
so I decided to dive into that question. I started doing equity, diversity, inclusion, like certificate programs and reading, and really trying to, dive into like, how can I make a difference with the tools that I have? And I found in that research, there was nothing. There was nothing there to prepare me to do this work in theater and the arts. I started freelancing, and what that meant at the time in 2021 was putting out fires. Companies going
Mhm.
through something and needing someone to go in and help.
Yeah.
Um, so all of that kind of put together, in combination with the fact that I didn't really want to be at my full-time job anymore, led me in the summer of 2022 to just quit my job and start my company.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I sent 40 emails to people I'd worked with in the past and just said, "Hi, I think there's this huge void in our industry. I think I have an idea of how to fill it. And would you, hire me to kind of learn on the job as I go?" And I'm very grateful. A lot of companies just said, "Yep, let's do this." Um,
Amazing.
and here I am in year two. I have, yeah, done a
Yes.
lot since then, but yeah, I have a very solid goal now, short term and long term. But I'm
Yeah.
just trying to prove that this work belongs in every theater space, every art space.
Yeah. Well, congratulations,
Thank
on
you.
this huge pivot and embracing a calling despite it perhaps feeling a little bit nebulous and, like, intangible and, theoretical,
Mhm.
but, clearly when there's a need and somebody is trying to be the filler for it, and in this case, that is you and your work, um, it will naturally happen organically, and that's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you are hired, what exactly is your process? Do you have an institution that is like, cool, this is the show that we're doing, or this is what we are, and we've noticed that this is the gap and this is what you're filling? Is it more like you come in and you're like, cool, I'm just going to do this and treat it the same that I do with the all the things? Is it cool, I'm going to meet all your people, feel what it is demographically and also with the project that you're doing, and then navigate accordingly? Is it, I've
Mhm.
only been given an hour and I have to do this, or I've only been, now I have 17 hours and therefore I have more time? Like, what is your process? And I imagine it changes, but I'm just, here we are.
Yes, frequently. Yes, so I will say, I do offer a variety of services because my work looks long term to making sure that arts organizations and like our system at large changes over time. So I
Yeah.
do coaching with organizations. I do EDI audits where I help clients like walk through their organization and talk to people around the organization and kind of give them like a roadmap of what
Mhm.
they can do with this work in a meaningful way. So I have workshops that I do. So I have those kinds of services. But like what I think you're asking about and like what I'd like to talk about is work when I work on a show.
Yeah.
Um, so when I think that's the difference here is one of the major things I see in theater and the arts is theater companies at large may be doing some EDI or DEI work, but that rarely reaches the artists and the crew and the designers. It rarely gets to the rehearsal room. So you know, my goal there is to I'll come in as early as the theater will have me because you know
Yeah.
the process truly starts with show selection.
Mhm.
So what shows can we do right now that some of them are meaningful and timely. Some shows it's like maybe not the best time to do it.
Yeah.
And then we get into casting. So
Right.
again, like I can advise and consult when it comes to, okay, we're going to cast you know, I don't know, or, can we cast a Black woman as Maria in West Side Story? Like some
Mhm.
theaters make choices, early in the process. And then I have to come in and kind of either help justify, the choice or tell them, it's not going to work um, for
Mhm.
whatever reasons. So if I've worked with a theater ahead of time, I'll do that work. If I'm going straight into the room, I try to talk to the director and stage manager ahead of time. Those are people who, uh, they do have some support from the organization, but really those are leaders who are in charge of holding a room of people.
Yeah.
And at this moment in time, directors and stage managers are holding rooms of people who are traumatized from
Yes.
a lot of things, COVID,
Mhm.
like we're still, in some places it's like we want to act like we're back to normal, but there is no
Yeah.
back to normal. We're all in this new place. Um, and yeah, so anyway, I really try to talk to those people about leading with humanity and grace and making space for people and setting expectations in advance,
Mhm.
so people really feel like they have like a solid place to walk into on that first day
Mhm.
of rehearsals. Um, and then, yeah, it depends. I read scripts. I look at cast lists. I try to get ahead
Yeah.
of what are the considerations we need here.
Yeah.
If I do a show that's heavy on racial trauma, it's like, okay, well, we need to maybe sit at the table for 2 days and talk about this so the actors feel secure in saying, racial slurs,
Mhm.
and that we have systems set up for those actors to check in before that and to check out after that.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of it is similar to like intimacy work, but it's
Yeah.
just bigger and broader and involves even just conversations. Um,
Yeah.
so the work is different to answer your question in
Yeah.
every room, but I will always start out by setting kind of room guidelines with people. And I know you were in one of my sessions. I was
It
fortunate
was.
enough to have you. But I really try to encourage people to think about how we all just come from different places and we all are carrying different backpacks full of different traumas from our industry.
Mhm.
And we have to acknowledge that before we like just dive in and start doing a play. We have to kind of look at
Yeah.
each other as humans and say, how do we want to how do we want to feel in this room? How do we want to react when we disagree? What are some tools we can use when we
Yeah.
need a minute? Um, so I'm really just getting granular there on setting up an environment like, in a corporate world, like HR would give you this packet and you'd have like kind of a training and onboarding. In theater, we
Mhm.
just start reading a play on day one. So I try
Right.
to, take that 30 minutes, to an hour, however long I'm given, to do that. And then my work really just goes from there. I make personal relationships with people who need support. I check in with a process. I'm there for difficult scene work, again, especially if it has to do with someone's identity, like if it's an
Mhm.
identity based trauma piece. Um, and then, I'll go in during tech, which, like I think everyone on your podcast knows what tech is. It's like the time in the rehearsal process where everyone loses their mind.
Or we
And
hope not, but sure.
we hope not. But in my experience,
Yeah,
yes,
it's
I'm very busy.
stressors are high. That's,
Yes.
to say the least.
Right. I always say like the enemies of EDI are being in a time crunch, wearing too many
Mhm.
hats, and feeling activated. And like all
Yeah.
three of those things are basically tech.
Yeah.
So, I just really try to be the person holding the room. I try to be the person who's only thinking about humanity in a room where everyone has a job and
Yeah.
no one has the job to care for the humans in the space. And
Yeah.
that's really what my work ends up being about
Yeah.
in the room.
So much to unpack. Thank you for going through that. I know that
Yes.
was also just like a very, rundown version of actually what the work is.
Yes.
I am curious when you talk about humanity, what are you meaning?
Yes. I mean, in this case, I come from an acting background too. So, especially being Black, and I'm approaching roles that are about racism. We're
Mhm.
dealing with racial trauma. I'm accessing my identity, my own personal identity as Kira, to play this role on stage. And I think we all know that as actors. Like, we all know we have to access things within ourselves. Um, but I don't know, like, I haven't seen much in terms of, like, the long-term impact on people having to do that night after night.
Mhm.
And then, of course, in some shows, especially here in Boston, we'll do shows about racial trauma for entirely white audiences.
Right.
And the theater is like, great, we did this awesome Black show, everyone loves it. We see the diversity first. But what are the
Mhm.
systems behind that? Like, what are we doing to care for those artists behind the
Yeah.
scenes? Who is behind the scenes? Are there any actors of color behind the scenes, or people on staff, or consultants? It's kind of like,
Right.
so when I talk about humanity, I think it's just looking at everyone as a person first, as a human first, before the
Mhm.
job, before the, like, social media praise.
Mhm.
It's like, let's take care of people first. Our industry is so quick and rushed, and there's no time, and no resources, that it easily forgotten about.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that I come to question often about this industry and frankly the world
Yeah.
at the moment
Mm.
specifically, is this idea of really seeing people and their humanity and how it's in some ways become this like buzzword of like, but I see humanity. And it's like, actually, though, every single one of us have biases. We
Yes.
do. We have biases.
Yep.
And it's very hard to admit that to ourselves because then it calls into question the things that we have done and the harm that we have caused and the things that we potentially will do and the harm that we potentially will cause. Like, it's very hard to put the mirror back on oneself and be like, huh, I am flawed. Like,
Yes. Oh my goodness.
and
Yes.
just and saying to like and acknowledging that we are coming from a place of, I'm gonna call it like deficit in
Mm.
that like this industry specifically, if this is what we're talking about, is founded in a white supremacist culture. Like that
Right.
is what it is.
Yes.
And people benefit from that and people don't benefit from that. And
Right.
therefore, like how, I guess from your experience thus far, how do you recommend, how are we as varied humans supposed to put our biases aside or acknowledge our, I don't even know if there's like a better word
Mhm.
for biases, but like I'm going to use
Mm.
that word for now. But like
Yeah.
bias, ingrained whatever we feel, like if we don't even know it's there or if we do know it's there, how do we not use it as like a tactic? Like
Yep.
how do we actually all in an ideal world, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done before
Oh,
that, but in
yeah.
an ideal world, how do we get to that point of actually seeing people with full humanity in spite of and despite all of our own ingrained biases?
Yes. Whew, big question.
I know,
And
that's where I go.
yeah, but it is like the crux of this work. Um, I think that the number one thing in my way as an EDI consultant is people just being afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being called a
Yeah,
racist, of being labeled with those things. Which is why, I have a workshop that's called, I'm just, rolling it out really, but like called
yeah,
Who Tells What Stories? Interrogating the
mhm,
Implicit Bias of Theater.
that,
And at large and in theater, we all need to start by saying we all have implicit bias. And I say implicit over unconscious because unconscious implies that we can't do anything about it, that it's like we're not
mhm,
thinking,
love
and
that reframe, yeah,
yeah, and words matter, like word order clearly
mhm,
matters to me. But like implicit bias. So, the spark notes of that workshop I teach is that we need to first acknowledge it. So that means every single one of us acknowledging that we came up in a system that taught us certain things and we all have that
right,
bias. Only when we acknowledge it can we interact with it and
mhm,
then challenge it. So those
right,
are kind of like those three takeaways. It's like we have to acknowledge that, okay, we want to see, what kind of actor do we see in the role of, um, I don't know what West Side Story is on my mind today, but like, who do we want to see as Tony in West Side Story? What does he look like when
Mhm.
you just imagine? And does he have to look like that, and why? So, again, acknowledge, interact, and then challenge.
Yeah.
So there's that. The other major thing in our way, in terms of seeing humanity and like interacting with humanity, is that we're so polarized, and we're so angry and defensive. And I know those are generalizations, but I've been, even in just the short time doing this work, that's what gets in the way. People expecting to be harmed, and people afraid to be pitted with the fact that they harmed.
Yeah.
So Art and Soul Consulting, my business, is really, like, the word is bridge building. Like, it's about bridge building. It's about the and the nuance of the
Mhm.
work, because we can't just tell people, hey, you're acting from a place of bias, without giving the person who's acting that way the tools to succeed next time. So I
Yeah.
say, like, one of the things I did was work with an actor who was being misgendered, and the effect that that had on them, and how to navigate, this role that they were doing. But I also coached the person who misgendered them, and
Mhm.
we were on Zoom working on pronouns for over half an hour, just talking on really definitive ways that that actor could not harm the other one, because he didn't want to. He cared. He just needed some guidance and grace and coaching.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is part of the reason why I do this work in theater, because I don't think I could go to like Florida and do this work. But like, when we're all thrown into a theatrical environment, we can't expect to just condemn the people who are, quote unquote, causing the harm. We need to build bridges so that we can work together, and that we can
Yeah.
talk, and we can only really engage with each other's humanity when we build that trust. And in art spaces, we just don't have a lot of time. So I go
Yeah.
heavy on the trust, right
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
I
my
love
shortest answer.
I love this. No, it's
Okay.
great. I mean, look, we're not gonna solve all of the things in, I'm gonna call it, an
We're
hour,
not?
with some grace. I know,
I
surprise.
wish we could.
But I think, even just mentioning a lot of these words which hold meaning, or
Mhm.
different, frameworks to think about interacting in this. Like, I'm gonna give you an acronym of the AIC, of acknowledge, interact, and challenge.
Yes.
I really think that being able to, I love an acronym because I can easily recall that, of like,
Yeah,
cool, let me stop for a second. Am I acknowledging this thing? How am I interacting with it? Now, how can I challenge it? Like, as a process to go through.
absolutely.
Love that. I also, you're saying so many of the words that, like, I feel like I shout from the rooftops around my own things that I care about, which are just like the anding of the things, the holding many truths simultaneously, the fact that there are the nuance in stuff and the specificity,
Mhm.
as artists, or for me specifically, when I think about the art that I want to tell, or I think about the art that resonates with me, it is the art that is really specific, and it is the art that is showing nuance around a conversation, around a community, around a situation, around, an environment that I haven't thought about in a specific way. And then what it does is it's hopefully expanding the way that I see the world and interact with the world, and therefore now I have even more nuance and specificity to go to for myself.
Yes.
And I think in this fear that you're naming, that so many of us have for very, very valid reasons,
Yes.
it becomes scarier to actually, in some ways, be as specific, because then perhaps there is the fear of, in that specificity, you're taking a stance, and then that does
Mm.
harm too.
Yeah.
Like, I think, it feels like a damned if you do and damned if you don't in some ways. Like, if we keep it really broad and general, then we're not really going to hurt anybody. But if we keep it really broad and general, then we're actually generalizing, and we're arguably perpetuating stereotypes, and we're
Yep.
not actually getting into the specifics of humanity. I think it's the ands. It's like it's an improv thing. It's like,
It's
yes, and
and
like, why are we
yes.
not? We know this, friends.
We should. I mean, and we as actors should know better than anyone, but
Yeah.
we just don't. We
Yeah.
so we so often don't leave room for the and it's
Yeah.
hard. And that, I often say, like, EDI work isn't the same as activism.
Mhm.
And me, Kira, yes, I am an activist. But activism is loud, and we just say what's wrong, and we point things out. And EDI work is really quiet and behind the scenes, and
Mm.
understanding, like, how do we implement change? How can we be heard on
Yeah.
both sides, and how do we bridge that divide to actually make that change? Like, that work is quiet and hard.
Yeah.
You're not going to see a picture on social media that shows you that work is happening.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, all these things are wrong, and here are the people on the other side, especially theaters, like, who are, really drowning right now after COVID and
Mhm.
trying to get things together. And, they're afraid. They're afraid of
Yeah.
being called out, of, all of that.
Well, also
So,
because we're living in a cancel culture right now
oof,
that is so quick to say, "You messed up, you're done." And
yes,
the lack of forgiveness around people who are perhaps trying, the assumptions that are being made of ill intent, there we're it's also we're not listening. I think that part too is like we are also this industry in my like beautiful ideal utopia of it is like that is why most of us become artists in some capacity is because we want to listen to one another and learn from one another. Like in my brain, that's like what an artist actually is.
right.
When somebody says like what, oh, so you're an actor. This is like I hate this line so much, but and it doesn't stem from anything cruel, but it's like, oh, so you're an actor. So how do I know you're not lying? Have you ever gotten that?
No.
Oh
Oh,
god,
I
this is
hate
like
that.
yeah, it's like, "Well, how do I know you're not lying?" It's like, "Actually, let me tell you what it actually means to be an actor from my perspective is I am going to be the most truthful to you
Yes.
always because that is my job, to
Yes.
show humanity and truth. If
Truth.
I'm lying, you're gonna read through that in 4 seconds, and what kind of actor am I then? You're not gonna believe that because I wouldn't believe that because that's not true." Like, but we're not listening
No.
to one another. We're not, like and that is acting is reacting, it is
Hmm.
listening, it is being.
Yep.
Truly, to act is to be like you are doing the thing. It is a doing. And to listen, we're missing these. I know I'm just like preaching to the choir in this
Please.
little
No,
small space
do it.
here, but
Preach.
I think it's also just that
Yep.
we're not listening. And this distinction, interestingly, from like the activism to the EDI, like the quiet versus the loud, I wish none of it had volume. I wish we were
Hmm.
just gauging it all from a place of connection. I wish it
Yeah.
was a place of listening, a place
Right.
of ands, a place of nuance, a place of specificity. And some people's brand of that might be louder and more social media heavy, and some
Yeah.
people's might be behind closed doors and having these personal conversations. But really, when push comes to shove, it's not about the volume of it. It's
Right.
how are you truthfully coming to it, trying very hard to acknowledge implicit bias
Yep.
and be graceful with oneself as well as others for when things will probably not go smoothly.
Right. Exactly. And oh, I love that you brought up cancel culture, because I had this, like, piece in my head for 6 months before I finally got it on paper. But
Mm.
I wrote an article called "Where Do All the Canceled People Go?"
Oh,
And yeah, and it was really inspired by one of my first experiences. And one thing I'll just mention, I just don't name anyone ever in my blogs. I
mm,
just take case studies as case studies.
yeah,
But I was, helping a theater who was in the middle of a crisis, and, an EDI crisis.
yeah.
And I saw firsthand what would have happened if no one had gone in and tried to help that company do better.
Mm.
Um, and, there were a lot of the company messed up for sure, but, like, people on social media, we get into, like, dehumanizing and
Oh god, yes.
blasting and what it all comes back to for me, of when I did actually talk to some of these people who are doing the social media blasting, who were harmed, by the way. I said, what's your goal? What's the
Mhm.
long term? Going back to, like, Jared's question of me, what is the goal? What do we want done? And really, there was no goal. It was, I'm angry. It's from a place of trauma.
Yeah.
I want to burn them down, and I get it. Again, I get it. However, where do those people go if they're canceled? They don't go away. They might
Yeah.
go away for a bit and then resurface. And when they do resurface, have they learned anything? Are they going
Mhm.
to be safer for people coming in later? Um,
Mhm.
that's my goal. And that's not easy, but it's easier to yell about injustice than it is to go in and
Yeah.
make space for those people to be better if they want to be.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's part of it. If our long-term goal is to make safer art spaces, to make theater better in general, then we need to make space for people to learn.
Yeah.
And, in
Yeah.
my work, make space to say, hey, you're going to make mistakes. It's okay. As
Yeah.
long as your goals, your value, and your mission are to do better, then I will hold your hand and we will do better. So, really, it's that short term work in the now while we work long term, because it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in this
I know.
hour.
No.
Yeah.
What are some tools that you have found are helpful in rehearsal spaces, for artists to use with higher ups in an institution,
Mhm.
for institutional folks to use with their artists in the spaces,
Yeah.
the groundwork that are maybe some tactics that can be employed for when and if harm is done, or the chain of commands for when people need to speak up. Like, what are some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my long-term goal is to just make an EDI consultant, a part of a show system as much as a stage manager is.
Yeah.
Because, my long-term answer to that question is I want a person in the room who can give and receive feedback in a kind and careful way, so that actors have that resource so they don't have to go to their director who's in charge of hiring and firing
Mhm.
them. So I ask, when I speak to like students, I say, like when you're hired, ask what kind of resources are available to you and for you on the
Mhm.
project. If there are no resources on a project, then I think it's I urge people to think both about what they need and how it might be received. Um, our goal is always to be heard.
Mhm.
So again, if we all kind of take a deep breath and approach things from a place of calm, we shouldn't have to be afraid to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah.
I know often I'm speaking from the eye here, and my experiences, things can just seem so wrong sometimes that it's hard to not come at an ask from a place of anger.
Yeah.
But I try to just kind of, in any acting or art environment, we're all coming together, for a common purpose. So really, if there's something that you need that you're not getting, taking that deep breath, coming from a very calm, even place, and making your ask. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answered your
Yeah.
question fully.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I actually love the idea of even bringing this up before your contract even begins, as though it's part of your negotiation.
Yes.
I think that's a very interesting offering that I haven't actually heard before, as though you would ask for money, you would ask for transportation, and you
Yeah.
would ask for emotional support while doing this. I think that feels so revolutionary, even though it
Mhm.
shouldn't. But because no, but you're thinking about the way in which you will be able to show up for this contract. And if you need these particular logistical resources, I imagine you would also need these emotional resources. And why not at
Exactly.
least ask upfront so that you know the expectations going into the room so that you can then protect yourself if there isn't somebody who is, on staff to hold that every single rehearsal, or they aren't planning on bringing somebody in as like an
Mhm.
EDI consultant to be able to hold that process. Then you can advocate on behalf of yourself preemptively of being like, cool, if you don't have this budget, I know this person. Or if you don't have this,
Yep.
available, how is it possible that I could then refer to this person and use them and involve that? Like, I love that as an offering.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
start before it even begins.
Yes, and
Mhm.
I think, I think of it very much again as like, okay, I'm doing a show where I have to do a sex scene. Like, do you
Yeah,
have an intimacy consultant or an intimacy
exactly.
director involved? Just
Exactly.
getting ahead of it, right, and asking. I mean, there's so many shows I've done now where I'm just like, I can't imagine them not having a resource, because
Yeah,
we're talking about advocating, like a lot of actors are not comfortable speaking any of their needs because there's this notion that we're replaceable. So it's not just like in
correct.
any other industry where it's like, yeah, I'll just ask for a raise. Like we are really undoing a lot of harmful, like just baseline things.
Foundational,
Found
yeah,
Thank you.
foundational stuff.
Exactly. So we're doing
Completely.
all of that, and it's just it's really difficult. So yeah, I think, just thinking about okay, and I keep bringing up shows, I'm just speaking personally, like, being a
Yeah.
black woman, but like doing The Color Purple, and you're doing
Mhm,
The Color Purple at a predominantly white institution for a predominantly white audience.
mhm.
The first thing I went in and did was on that project was gather the cast and have a conversation about what does it mean to be black. Let's talk about the diversity among us,
Mhm.
and just doing that work of like, how do we interact as a black cast with the idea of going to church? For some,
Mm.
some church was like foundational to their upbringing, and for some, it was really harmful and ostracized
Mhm.
them as like, like a trans black person or a
Mhm.
gay black person. Um, so, just being able to address again like those identity-based things at work within the system of a show and within the system of an arts organization and community.
Yeah.
There is no one, without a EDI consultant, there is no one with that job, solely with
Yeah.
that job.
Yeah.
So right, like that's just my goal is that there is I'm trying to do the work of making it so that there are
Yeah.
consultants in every room. I really think that
Yeah.
that's the answer.
Are you willing to talk about the questions that you used with us when we were creating, like, our community guidelines?
I'd love to.
Um, I would love to unpack some of those things just so that
Absolutely.
people have that if they're creating it for themselves or if somebody, isn't able to, for whatever reason, hire an EDI consultant, but they want to at least start this foundationally with a smaller organization. What do
Yes.
you kinda do?
Yes, absolutely, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about is, like, how can I offer resources for companies who can't yet, like, everyone I've worked with, it's not in the budget yet. So I kinda
Yeah.
go in and try to prove to them why they need to put it in the budget. So yeah, for those, just wanting to set up that container of a room,
Yes.
I always start my guidelines, and again, people can do their own do their own thing, but my own thing,
Mhm.
I like writing. I'm a writer and creative person, so I start by asking, what are some words that people have that pop up for them around how they want to feel in the room.
Mhm.
What do they want their work environment to be like? What do they want this process to be like? And that it kind of starts people just getting out of their heads, and
Mhm.
one word is easier than just like diving into a really meaty conversation about EDI.
Yeah.
So, I often hear things like collaborative, supportive, safe, brave, fun, um,
Mhm.
and I just kind of get things going that way. I'll then usually lead the conversation into the category of expectations, and just, what are some expectations that we have as actors or as crew, stage management, and directors. That's something I didn't mention is that I do these guidelines with everyone in the room taking
Yeah.
off their title. So it's really important that everyone just gets to speak as a human being at work rather than
Yeah.
director speaking to actor. So the director on, this project too, as much as anyone else says, I have this expectation, so that actors can say, well, I have this expectation as well. And
Right.
then, for just a minor example, actors may have an expectation of feeling unhurried. That's one I've heard a lot lately, like just feeling they have space and time to
Mm.
breathe. And then, but that can't just exist on its own. We also have the expectation from leaders of, well, in order to create that environment for you, I need you to be prepared, and I need you to try to be on time, and I need
Mm.
you to speak out and speak up when you have needs, because we
Yeah.
can't get ahead of anything if you don't speak up. So we put all those expectations together, and that
Love it.
that starts our room out, in a good place. And again, starting to build that trust. And then the most important thing I end with usually is tools.
Mhm.
So what are some tools that we want to put into the space for folks to use? So for example, if I mentioned if someone gets misgendered, how do we want to approach that? It's really
Mhm.
important to have tools at use, because otherwise, again, we're up against that fear of what happens when I make a mistake. Oh my God, I'm a horrible person. I don't know what to do. It's like, no, no, no. If we have the tool of we're going to just correct quickly, say thank you, and move on, then we
Mhm.
know. Then it's like, okay, we make that mistake. We have a tool. We know what to do.
Yeah.
We what if tensions are really high and it's tech, and you just, people are on stage like really stressed out, someone said something mean. We have a tool that says, let's take 5. It's, again, so simple, but like giving actors, directors, anyone the permission to just, if you need 5, take 5. It's better that we take 5 minutes than someone has an explosion of anger on the
Yeah.
stage. So
Yeah.
those are just a few. I mean, there's so many. Speaking in draft is a huge one. It ends up on all of my documents, where it allows people to speak without a fully formed thought. So again,
Mhm.
thinking of like, like a white person playing a racist character. How can they express, their character's motivations, without harming
Mhm.
their fellow actors? So we implement something like speaking in draft, so that they can speak something and signify that, it's not a fully formed thought, and they welcome feedback. They're not speaking from a place of like, this is the right thing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, those, words that I mentioned in the beginning, I try to put into like a mission statement for the room that we can all rally around. And then again,
Yeah.
feel like we as humans have intentionally created this environment within which to work.
Yeah.
And if you do that well, that holds the room.
Yeah. Having experienced you do that in, um, this rehearsal, period for the band's visit was really beautiful, and I think it established, a foundation upon which we've all been able to work and come into the room
Mhm.
while the world has been the world, and to hold all these things simultaneously. I remember when our director came in and actually, like, read basically the synthesized mission statement that you created for us based off of all these things that we put into the room. It felt there was a smile and an energy that people were like, "Oh, I was heard."
Yeah,
"Oh,
there it
we
is.
listened to one another," going back to that word. Like, "Oh, even if people will mess up, even if things will get derailed, even if tensions will get high, even if harm potentially is done, at least even for a little period of time, there was a moment of feeling seen and heard and responded to that has been more often than not been possible." So,
Yes, exactly that.
and
Yeah.
so we're talking incrementally here about change over hopefully a long period of time that we want to look into the future. And if these small little building blocks are being made, then we are slowly getting there. It's hard because
Right.
we all want it to be done
We
now,
want it now, but it can't,
but
but like you said the magic words, like it all comes back to being seen, heard, and valued. Like
yeah.
those, we all want those things.
And we all
Um,
deserve those things
yes,
too,
yes, yes.
and are
And
worthy of those things because we're simply human. Like
amen.
that,
Say it again.
you know.
Yeah, it's yes, that. And I think that's the important thing, no matter anyone's personal identity, again, like we're working together. We have agreed to create art together,
Yeah.
And that's why my approach is has to be that bridge building, because if we don't build connections, then we can't build trust. Then we can't create this short-term and long-term environment where we give each other the benefit of the doubt, and where we let each other
Yeah.
make mistakes and grow and learn. That's why, like I admire, anyone trying to do this work. It's hard, but that's why I don't start my sessions with like, okay, check your privilege, or,
Yeah.
this is white supremacy at work, or, like yes, yes. And the goal
Mhm.
is to bring people together.
Yeah.
And that really goes back just connecting as humans, like that's so much more important to me in this work than any of the diversity and inclusion certificates or programs out there. It
Yeah.
really is, yeah, foundational.
Yeah. I know you probably can't answer this as shortly as you'd want us to, but maybe what are going back to that initial question of what do you want us to do? What are maybe like a couple things that we can do in this moment?
Yes. Yes. And do you mean we as like anyone listening to this?
Sure, keep it open.
First and foremost, we need to start really thinking about creating conversations again. And I know that sounds, silly, like saying on a podcast, but this is the work. This is the
Mhm,
work, not social media. A place where you can look
mhm.
at people and hear people and engage. If you really, really, really care about something and you want to be heard, just posting on social media is not going to cut it. It's we're not
Yeah,
changing anyone's mind there. That's why I share my resources there, and I try to share my writing and engage with people as much as I can, but I don't post there anymore. Like I
yeah,
really, when I see people, they see maybe they see a cast list or a collage of cast pictures that they don't see any diversity there, and instead of commenting on that picture and being angry, call the theater,
yeah.
email the theater, ask, don't assume anything. If you really want to learn, ask. And I say this as a consultant working with many of the theaters. Whenever something happens on social media, they call me and they say, what should I do? I
Mhm.
tell them to please reach out with their feedback, and they can get on the phone with the artistic director or the managing director and the EDI consultant, and we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Not once in 1.5 years has someone taken up that offer.
Mm,
So that is the large thing on my heart right now is like, have the conversations. If you really
yeah,
care, then talk about it, because there are people who will make the change.
yeah.
There are those who aren't there yet, but there are those who want to.
Mhm.
And then secondly, I would encourage, I pulled this book out. It's just one of the
Yes.
many, but
Yeah.
everyone needs to read. I'm holding up Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. One of the many books that I've found are actually the most useful as I now start thinking about training, because I'm working on training some folks to work with me, so I'm not the only
Mhm.
consultant in the rooms, and looking at training people at large. It is really about having difficult conversations. There is another book by the same authors called Difficult Conversations. And giving and receiving feedback in a way where we can be heard and we can hear. It starts
Mhm.
there. Like, I have learned very little from my diversity and inclusion training, and learned more about this work from those kinds of books.
Yeah.
Books about mindfulness, books about connection, books by Brene Brown, just
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
I try to bridge like Brene's work to theater and the arts, and like it just
Mhm.
seems like no one has really done that. We have these foundational diversity, hugely amazing books that teach us about the work of, EDI or DEI or anti-racism or, any of
Mhm.
those. But that would be my suggestion, is just like mindfulness, connection, feedback, conversations. Like, let's start there. And then we
Love
can do
it.
the work from a less activated place.
I love it. Um, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm so grateful now to get to know you. I am excited to see how this is your work is just going to really explode around this country as it already has. And please know that it's already making differences, and that's really impactful. And I'm so happy that you agreed to be on this podcast and share some of that with our listeners. because it starts with all of us. You
Yeah.
know, it's not just if you're employed and in a room and in a rehearsal space, or if you run a theater company and you're trying to create a season. Like, it's not that. It takes a village and it takes a community and it takes all of us. And it takes all of us to agree to want to actually try to change the systems that we have inherited that are
Yes.
flawed.
Yes. Could not have said it
So
better myself.
so
And
thank you.
no, I thank you so much. I'm so grateful and so honored that you had me.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that I, gotten to like know you on the process and
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
No, and just yeah, thank you so much for creating this space for me
Of
too.
course. For anybody who wants to work with you, for anybody who wants to hire you, for anybody who wants to take any of your programs or read your stuff, where and within your own best boundaries can people reach you?
Love that. We love boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So you can find me best at artandsoulconsulting.com. So art and soul consulting spelled out. There you can schedule an introductory consultation with me that's free. You can access my blog. So I have all those, the writing I've done that's there is also free to read. And then I have a page where you can check out my services. So, I work on shows, I do coaching, I do workshops, I do audits. And, long term, just looking to bring this work further and wider. And
Yeah.
again, just bit by bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, folks can find me there. I'm on Instagram at Kira Troilo as well.
Perfect. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.